Hello, I'm Paul Laney, the retired sheriff from Cass County, North Dakota, and the current vice president of national sales here at Turnkey Corrections.
And I'm Lauren Matthews, and I'm the current social media and content specialist here at Turnkey.
And you are listening to JailTalk, and I cannot tell you how excited I am today. Today we are privileged to have in the studio with us the Anoka County, Minnesota Sheriff Jim Stuart. He's a good friend. He's a great sheriff, and we are really excited to have you here. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So he's got a little bit of a history. He's kind of been a busy guy over the years. Lauren, why don't you tell us a little bit about the good sheriff?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sheriff Stuart is the 17th sheriff of Anoka County since the office was established in 1857. Anoka County is situated on the north side of the Twin Cities and is the fourth largest county in the state of Minnesota. The sheriff's office is a full-service agency that has 6 divisions that provide diverse services to all communities in the county and the region. Sheriff Stuart spent most of his law enforcement career with the sheriff's office and advanced through the ranks during his career. During his tenure as a supervisor and as a command staff member, he was responsible for the supervision and oversight of the Field Training Operations Unit, the K-9 Unit, the Honor Guard, the Civil Unit, the Office of Professional Standards, the SWAT Team, and the later Parole Operations and Administrative Divisions. He has been married to his wife Lisa for 30 years, and they have 3 children. They reside in Andover, Minnesota, and are very active as a family in their church and throughout the community. He has demonstrated commitment to providing the best possible services to the citizens that he proudly serves and actively participates in numerous collaborative efforts across the region and nation. It is his belief that by working together, we can make a difference.
Amen. And that is definitely you. That sums you up very, very well. You know, our topic today, folks, is going to be leadership during crisis. And obviously a hot topic across the country as we speak. And, Sheriff, you've had a few opportunities lately to lead during crisis. Your office was recently asked to respond and assist during the riots in downtown Minneapolis. So how were you first notified, and who did you send?
Well, as you said, we've had a few of those opportunities over the years. And generally speaking, as something begins to erupt, we kind of know what's happening, as anyone does who's watching the news. And so usually what will first happen is as the wheels start to wobble on society, we'll start becoming aware, and so we'll have our team on a standby mode. And then once a request comes, typically we will respond with our street elements, meaning we'll send those that are equipped for mobile field force response, and in this case to Minneapolis to assist where they're able. As it continues to evolve, then we would page out additional mobile field force elements and things like that. So the initial response was those patrol deputies with the proper equipment, then some additional mobile field force response, as well as command staff members to assist with the MAC, or the multi-agency command center.
Okay, and that talk, especially a lot of our listeners are law enforcement leadership, their sheriff's office leadership, jail administration, field administration. And you did send a number of your command officers, and they ended up both in the emergency operations center and into the tactical operations center. And coming from the outside in, and we can talk a little bit about that because you and I also have a relationship that goes a ways back doing that. What were their roles, and how did they get involved?
It kind of evolved. We subscribe to the attitude of how can I help? And so when we get there, we are happy to say who's in charge and what can we do to assist making this a success story. And so our team rapidly evolved. We had our mobile field force elements. We became responsible for kind of coordinating our own efforts because there were so many operating channels and so many elements on board. We arranged a bunch of vans. We worked with the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, so we kind of coordinated a lot of the transports, the arrest coordination, the booking coordination, and ultimately we ended up also having our chief deputy at the command center kind of guiding and directing the tactical operations as they unfolded as well.
Well, I can tell you from experience, and I'll share a little bit of experience. Sheriff Stuart and I go back a long ways. Not only were we United States Marines right around, we were out at the same amount of time. We also, have served together in a number of capacities. But years ago in North Dakota, we had a situation developing out in western North Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline. We put out the call for help, and Sheriff Stuart and his team answered. So I can speak from experience. Your background and your knowledge, and your men and women who came into that situation were phenomenal. And you could tell they were well trained, and you could tell they knew their game. And that was definitely what we needed at that time. And I think that's a big one. We're going to talk about that in a little bit here.
Very good.
Yeah, well, as someone who has never been in that kind of situation at all, what is it like to have to actually send your people into that kind of situation and to another agency, and how do they typically feel about being deployed into that?
Sure. Well, it can be very challenging because obviously it's a lot of unknowns. It's a rapidly evolving dynamic event, but we want to make sure we have the proper equipment. We want to make sure that we're sending people who've had the proper training. And for me, as important as anything, I want to make sure that our people are safe. Do they have the proper support to come out successful on the back end of whatever situation we're putting them into? And so that's probably the biggest struggle, is trying to evaluate what are we responding to and do we have the proper resources to make sure that they're writing success stories. How do they feel about it is continues to inspire me, because they know that they will go where they're called. They will go where the help is needed. And when North Dakota called, trying to explain to other people, well, why is that our problem? Why are we responding? And I said, not unlike when our citizens call 911, they expect someone to call to come. They expect and they need help.
Mm-hmm.
When our fellow sheriffs call and when they say we need help, we need support, it's no different. We have an obligation to take care of each other, to take care of our citizens, and to take care of our law enforcement partners.
I think it really comes down to duty and honor. I got asked that just like you. That wasn't my event. I was 180 miles away and a number of counties away. I just had the largest amount of resources, being one of the largest agencies in the state. And it's about duty and it's about commitment. And just like anything, when you don't have enough people to contain something that has become violent and something that has means to get out of control, then you have to reach outside your boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different than when military units have to call in bigger units. Well, there's only so many of us that wear a badge and are sworn law enforcement officers. And we got asked that all the time. And I think a lot of your, people like your people, and, we had people come in from the South. We had officers from Alabama and Louisiana, and people
Mm-hmm.
were like, why would you go all the way up north to help solve the problem? Because they're brothers and sisters. It's about law and order, and it's about, the rule of law and making sure that everybody is safe on both sides of an incident and keeping it contained. And when you put on that badge and you take that oath, yes, you do it for your community, but you really do it for also your state and your country, and you're going to go wherever they need you to go. And certainly saw that with that. And along that lines, a good question is, what advice would you give to other law enforcement leaders regarding like readiness? Because within their agencies, equipment, that type of stuff, because it appears this is going to be happening for a while. And if you don't think you're not going to get the call, you're probably wrong, because at some point, you look at North Dakota, we utilized every single agency in the state at some point, whether they were a one-person office or they were one of the largest ones like us or Fargo PD or Bismarck, Mandan, Grand Forks. We all were involved. What advice would you give them to prep?
I think there's multiple levels for that preparation. The first thing is the mindset. Like you said, am I going to be a part of this? Do I want to be a part of writing success stories? And what would that look like for my agency? And it might be one person if you're a smaller agency. It might be 40 people. It might be an MRAP or an armored vehicle. It might be a bus. There might be resources that you have that are just unique to that region. And the trick is to think it through. Number one, work with your agency to know what your commitment level could look like. And then secondly, I think to get out in the community, whether you're working with community leaders or some of your other elected officials, but let them know your intent so that when these questions start coming, they already know your foundation. They know who you are. They know what you're about. They know how you're intending to respond. And then I think the third prong would be having the proper equipment and training in place in advance, because if you think at some point in time it might not come to you, you're probably setting yourself up for a dangerous circumstance. I mean, we all need to be prepared. Within our own office, I always say prepare for the absolute worst and hope for the absolute best. And somewhere in there will be where reality lies.
Absolutely. I look back on those days, and there were so many things. I mean, people would think, well, we're in the upper Midwest and things stay calm. Why would you need a field force training? Why would you need to? Because, and look at that. We were standing, field force lines in the middle of the open prairie during our time. And here you guys were in a very, very urban environment, and obviously it got very dangerous. And I think a lot of times people think we go out there and we have a side, and we don't have a side. We have our side is safety.
That's right.
Our side is safety of the public, and that means whoever's out in there. And certainly when attacked and when assaulted and when people are taking criminal action, your people are going to have to step up and get involved. And at other times that you really hope you can de-escalate the thing and have that presence and make it go away. And that all comes back to your training and the things that you do.
Well, and I've been very vocal over the years to say it's our job to support and defend people's right to have a peaceful and lawful protest. And I will be the first one to fight for them to have that right.
I will I used to say that too. I'll defend that to my death.
Absolutely.
We take that oath to defend.
Absolutely.
And it's our right as American citizens to protest against our government,
That's
to
right.
protest about things we don't like.
That's right.
But there's a line.
Yeah, the balance is, of course, as you know, I mean, once somebody crosses the line, once you start stepping on the rights of someone else, once you start destroying things that belong to other people, then you have crossed the line. If you're breaking the law or taking away somebody else's rights, then I'll also be the first one to line up buses and make sure that we're arresting people and prosecuting them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, like Paul said, the current situation is probably one that will be around for a little while at least. What is your advice of the areas that agencies should focus on first?
For the agencies themselves, is for preparedness?
Yeah.
Yeah, to get ready for that call when it comes.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of what we talked about. Make sure you have equipment, and by the way, you don't have enough. I mean, that's just the reality. Train, and as the old expression says, train like your buddy's life depends upon it, because they probably will. And have those dialogues within the community. I think you can't be overly prepared or overly equipped to go into these situations. Now, of course, the delicate balance always becomes the budgetary constraints. You know, if money were not an object, I would have 3 times more equipment and stockpile for resources to be prepared for the future. But we know that there's always that balance, and so it's a constant guessing game. Use your resources. Use Sheriff Laney and some of the others who have been playing this game for a few years and understanding what those actual resources are and what you might need, so that you don't under or overestimate.
I think one of the things you said, Sheriff, is something that maybe we should expound on a little bit for our listeners and our leaders, is that education of the public and that education of your commissioners and your counselors. That's prior, like months prior, years prior, to get them to understand. I was very blessed that I had a very unique relationship with my commissioners. A lot of times you'll hear a lot of like commissioners and law enforcement leaders have this headbutting situation. I didn't have that. I mean, it didn't mean we always agreed on everything, but we had a mutual respect. And I wasn't, they had the right to ask me anything they wanted to anytime. And I wanted to always be ready and educate them on who and what we were. Maybe expound a little bit on how critical that is to be doing that with your elected leaders. That, it can't be just because I'm sheriff and I say so. Well, yes, you're a sheriff and you say so. You're the jail administrator, you say so. That's going to get maybe your instant situation done, but then you got to deal with all the residual. But if you took some time to educate, let me talk a little bit how important you feel that is.
So I think collaboration is key to success in any of these endeavors. And like you said, sometimes you're going to disagree, and that's okay. I'd rather agree to disagree, but have those dialogues and have constructive, healthy dialogues. Battling for the sake of battle isn't going to do anybody any good. But I think there's a lot of value in having those sit-down conversations, because using the county commissioners as the example, they have the same constituencies, constituents. So they're going to have the same phone calls as we're getting. They're going to be the same people that are upset about the way things are unfolding. And right, wrong, or indifferent, no matter how much you try to do the right things out in the community, somebody's not going to see it that way. Somebody's going to twist what you're trying to do, and someone else is going to misinterpret what has actually been played out because of either social media or just their own interpretation. There's going to be a lot of misinformation that will come from all of these events. And so if at the start, all of your partners, all of your stakeholders are online and understand the core mindset, functionality, and an operational direction that your agency will go, then they're going to be able to stand with you in defense of your actions, because they'll know your mindset, they'll know what your leadership looks like, and they'll have a real good understanding before these things even begin to unfold.
What I found happening with a lot of my commissioners during our situation, and ours went on for 7.5 months, so I very much respect what's happening here and how long-term this is and how it wears you down. What I found happening is when I was either like being attacked by certain members of the public or certain elements of the protesters, or certain elements of the media that were taking things at an angle that just wasn't true, they were backing me up. They would be, no, that's not what he said. That's not what he's doing. This is what they're doing. And I think, like you said, that collaborative effort. So I can't echo anymore what Sheriff Stuart said is work with your commissioners and work with your community leaders and reach out to your neighborhoods and all that and talk, bring them in, show them what your capabilities are, show them what field force is and what it's maintained to do. Be educational that way, because that investment now is going to pay massive dividends down the road when you're in the storm and you haven't got time to teach and train anymore. That's because you're responding, and it'll really pay dividends for you then. So I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm really glad you expounded on that. You recently responded to Minneapolis city leaders when they began pushing for the abolishment of the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm just going to kind of dive into that one because I think your message was very strong. What was your reaction and what prompted you to respond the way you did? Because there was no doubt where you stood, and I think it's something that our listeners and law enforcement leaders need to know where you came from with that, because your message, you couldn't deny what you were saying.
Well, the message was, of course, on the heels of the civil unrest and the riots, and Minneapolis City Council had made the comment about originally abolishing the police department, then softening it to defund and restructure. And my I've never been bashful about having an opinion. So
when did that start, Jim?
Yes, exactly. About 50 some odd years ago.
Exactly.
I think my motivation behind that was that they needed to understand the consequences of a flippant comment. And while I don't think it truly was a flippant comment on their part, it was based in emotions to the events. It wasn't driven in logic. And so my motivation behind that was as a support agency that responded to assist our brothers and sisters at the Minneapolis Police Department with regaining control of their city at a point in time when the chaos was still very much alive and well, and continues to be a very difficult situation for that city. So to make a comment along the lines of abolishing and then defunding the police department, what they didn't realize is that 50,000-foot view. We always tell our command staff and other sheriffs, it's easy to stand on the ground and to look at what's going on around you, but we know that our commentary can have ripple effects. And so we need to try to force ourselves to get to that higher level and think about those ripple effects. And so what I was trying to speak to were the ripple effects. The council, by making those commentary, they completely eviscerated the Minneapolis Police Department, in my opinion. And by what I mean by that is, within hours, they had dozens of police officers walk off the job. They had dozens just quit. Within days, they had another 150, and these numbers are ballpark based on my recollection, that submitted their notice of intent to retire. They had another, again, within days or weeks, another 150 plus that put in for post-traumatic stress medical retirements. And so those officers that were left behind found themselves feeling very unsupported, in very difficult times, when in fact they've never needed support, and law enforcement across the nation has never needed support like they do right now. And now that's bad enough, but you bring it to the next level. As we know, over the last few decades, the recruitment pool has gotten very shallow. And so as the number of viable, good candidates that we want to come into this line of work has continued to decline, those type of comments push it right through the floor.
Absolutely.
They have decimated the recruitment capabilities for the Minneapolis Police Department in an already very shallow pool. So for an organization that size to have, if they're 800-900 officer department, if they lose 300 people, even with a restructure, they're going to need to maintain some pretty serious numbers. And across the metro, there aren't 300 applicants. There aren't 300 viable candidates in the Twin Cities area right now.
For all the agencies.
For all of the agencies.
Right.
And as a candidate who is looking to get into this profession, I was hoping that they would understand, and by the way, none of them reached out to me to talk about it, but I was hoping that they would understand that those type of comments would destroy their ability for future recruitment in an already very difficult situation. And that's why it created a very difficult situation for the entire future of the Minneapolis Police Department and for the city of Minneapolis. And thus, the other side of that coin is that as an agency who spent a lot of resources, a lot of our own sleep and dollars and stress supporting that city, one of my comments was, I don't have an appetite for doing it again.
Right.
Now, of course, we will support the citizens of Minneapolis. We will support our partners in blue down there. But to think that this is going to happen every time is naive and ignorant for any leadership to think that that's the solution. And I know, tragically, nationally, we're seeing a lot of pushback from support agencies who are saying, if you're not going to make an effort to fix this, why would we come in to try and
Portland
fix
was a perfect example of that, where they had a plan to go in, and the sheriffs in that area said, absolutely not. Why would I set my people up for failure? Why would I set my people up to do that? I look back on the situation where we were called to go, and I had, at one point at its height, I had over 40 deputies that were deployed out to Western North Dakota during some of the massive events we had out there. But it's because we were supported. We were supported by the governor. We were supported by the state. We had good leadership in place. And I knew my people were going to be as safe as they could be in a horrible situation. We know that. People always say, well, you signed up for that. No, we didn't sign up to go get hurt. We didn't sign up to be cannon fodder. We signed up to make a difference and to do something honorable and protect our communities, to be that sheepdog. And when you're going to go into that, and that's where I think you nailed it right on the head, Jim, is that they let emotion and rhetoric carry the day versus what's going to happen 3, 4, 5 weeks down the road. And your generation, Lauren, is the future. It's your generation that we're recruiting to become these officers. And if they, are looking at opportunities where they can go someplace, why would they go to Minneapolis PD, where they're going to be thrown under a bus? Yeah. They are not going to be supported. They're going to be, pretty much chastised and undermined everywhere they go. Or they could go to an organization that's just the opposite, that's going to support them and value them. So I think it's just the beginning of where they're going to find that kind of rhetoric. And, in leadership, I think this is just me speaking my opinion. I was an elected leader for 12 years, is that words matter. And, you have a responsibility when you are an elected leader, even when you're angry, to check yourself and make sure that the message you're delivering is what's best for your community and your people, even though you're mad. And that didn't happen here.
Well, and on a larger scale, I think we're seeing that nationally, what's happening when we buy into the false propaganda and the negative rhetoric and the anti-law enforcement sentiment, which, when we really dissect it, is not based on statistics, it's not based in reality, it's not based in truth. And so that's one of the things that's also very difficult. And as I've talked with our elected leaders at the local, state, and national level, is when did it become wrong to speak the truth? Yeah. I mean, I'm not asking for you to defend law enforcement. Just stop letting people bash us around you without at least presenting data, the statistics, because it doesn't hold up. And like you, I've had opportunity to travel the nation, and these are individuals that love their community so much that they're willing to fight for every neighborhood, regardless of your background, your skin color, your income, or even how you think about them. And they care for their community so much that they're willing to respond to whatever unfolds and even lay down their life if need be.
Absolutely.
And until somebody else is willing to step up and accept that responsibility, accept that role, I would just really, really caution them about spreading that negative rhetoric further.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I will say thank you for sharing on that, because coming from the generation that's all about social media, it seems like a lot of the really loud voices, like you said, aren't necessarily the sheriff's voice is being heard. And I think it's really important for, obviously other sheriffs to hear your advice, but also just anyone in the community to hear your voice as well. Because like I said, on social media, it's not necessarily the voice being heard. And, for any, if you want to call it an argument, whatever, you have to hear both sides.
That's right.
So thank you for sharing that. We're going to transition a little bit. You are a well-recognized and respected law enforcement leader in the region, but also nationally. You're a member of the National Sheriff's Association Board of Directors. So what influenced you to run for that position?
I think initially running for the board of directors, I wanted to be engaged in the process. I wanted to be engaged in helping guide the future of the nation's sheriffs. And then later to run for the executive committee, honestly, my motivation, there was a sheriff out of North Dakota, Sheriff Paul Laney, that I had gotten to know over the years.
I think I've heard that name.
Yeah. But his leadership, his interactions, and what I saw from him at the national level really did inspire me. And it showed me that it was okay to think outside the box, even when sometimes you receive a little bit of resistance. And so, having said that, I think there's a very constructive, positive direction for America's sheriffs to continue pushing us during these really difficult times. And so that was the other part for me, was to be able to be a part of positive change. And knowing that we are going to continue to face very difficult times, I want to be a part of writing those success stories.
Well, I'll say I'm very honored. I did not know that till today, that was there. I've known you and respected you for years, and we've always clicked. So I'm very honored for you to say that, and thank you, Jim.
It's true.
You're pretty easy to respect, my friend. Not only are you on the board, though, you're going to be our national president here in just a few years. And what issues are you going to tackle? What's on your mind? What do you want to deal with, and what message do you have to our nation's sheriffs and jail administrators out there?
Yeah, I think as president, assuming we get there and we still have a world in the coming months, for me, I've always been passionate about youth programs. I'm a firm believer that when we invest in our youth, we're going to create a more positive future for all of us. And so youth programs are real important, as well as unity. I've always talked about positive change as one of my catchphrases, if you will, or my taglines, because I believe in it. And I think a part of that now moving forward is going to be a much stronger focus on unity and those public partnerships. And they've always been important to me and in my communities. But I think we need to continue to broaden what that looks like at the national level, and not just working with, with our own counties. It's the Rotary, the Lions, Kiwanis groups, the senior groups, the veterans groups, the list go on. And we want to be really closely engaged with our communities. But then how do we create programs for the nation's sheriffs, again, to broaden some of those community partnerships, to broaden some of those youth programs? There's a lot of good things that I think are on the horizon, but we need to continue to push those as we evolve again in those positive directions. And the other reality is, in these times that are more bizarre than ever, is we need to be subject to change. Like I said, it's a couple years out. Our nation's sheriff's priorities could certainly evolve and change dramatically. I think in the simplest concepts of investing in youth and unity will always be important, but the specific focus of 2 years, 3 years from now might be ever evolving.
Absolutely. One of the things that I loved about being on the board is, and under my years on the board, was that we had the ability to help change direction. I got to fight for the 1033 program. I was one of the sheriffs that went in, and it was so important to me to protect our people across the country with body armor, and the cell out there by those that didn't want us to have that was, you're militarized, you look like military, people. And I'm like, no, the same bullets that stop a bullet from hitting a soldier or a Marine are the same bullets that stop our cops. It's not about the camouflage look, we'll paint it a different color or whatever the case may be. It's about the equipment's already made, it's already there, they're done using it, let's save tax dollars, let's get it in. It's not about militarizing our people, because in violent situation, the protection of our people, if you're going in to do a rescue under fire, that same MRAP or that same Humvee, armored Humvee, it's a bullet stopper. It's not a military vehicle, it's a bullet stopper that's going to save the lives of officers and ultimately citizens. And I was ready for that fight, and I was really enjoyed going up to that level and working with OJP and went to BJA and worked with you worked with the U.S. Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General of the United States had representatives there, and we had a voice, and that's what I love the most. As sheriffs, we had a very strong voice, and we're not we're elected, we're independently elected.
That's right,
and we're able to go in there and share our concerns. That was one of my passions, and one of the things I really enjoyed during my time on the board and all the committees and the different things we did. What are some of the legislative issues you see really coming at us in the coming years?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few. Certainly, there's some of the forfeiture issues. There's a lot of pushback on forfeiture, and what we've seen, especially within the narcotics arena, is the only way to get the drug dealers' attention is to go after their finances. That's the only thing they care about. And so to take that ability away, I think is a very slippery slope. I think it's a very dangerous path to go down, to take that tool away from law enforcement. And certainly the legalizing of marijuana, that we've seen some of the tragedies that are happening in other parts of the country where they've allowed those cards to be played out. And I think across the board, we just need to continue to monitor, again, the truths that are coming out of these states, and to be very careful moving forward with impulsive actions versus educated decisions. And so I think that's another big part of it. I don't know, what are you thinking?
I think you hit it right there. I know the forfeiture issue was really big as I was leaving the sheriff's world. That was always hot on our top on that. And I think right now you're going to see a lot of challenges towards what we can and can't do with Fourth Amendment. I think you're going to see a lot of challenges just on really trying to handcuff what law enforcement can do as a whole. When you see them pushing for federal government to start putting restrictions on local police, I can't say what wording it's going to have, but I think you're going to be dealing with it. I think you're going to because you're going to see a lot of momentum out there trying, again, going on that rhetoric, not looking down at how well trained we are. You know, when I hear people, well, they should learn how to de-escalate. We de-escalate hundreds of thousands of situations every single day in this country that don't make the news. That's the real law enforcement. The one or two events that happen and then get so sensationalized out of control. That's what hurts us. But then they start making decisions off that. They start trying to legislate off that. When you have entire communities throwing school resource officers out of their school districts on rhetoric and anger without stopping to think for 2 seconds how important and how much impact those officers would have. It's sad. So I think that's going to be one of the big things that comes back, that you as our president and our national board are going to have to deal with this, just trying to stop some of this tumble and this attack that isn't legitimate, and it's not based on fact. It's based on emotion right now. And I hope the emotion stops soon before there's too much damage.
And that's where I think a lot of those community partnerships are really going to come into play, because when the community knows the truth, they're going to also stand with us. And as we talk about police reform all across, each state and across the nation, it's critical. We need to be fluent. We need to keep pushing ourselves to be better. And I think America's sheriffs and America's law enforcement, for the most part, wants to be held to a higher standard. We understand that this is a very delicate balance. We hold the public trust very dearly. But as we look at police reform, and I know within our own state there was a lot of legislation that had passed this past year, and a lot of our legislators had reached out and said, well, what do you think of this? And what about this? I said, it's great. We've been doing it for decades. There's this concept, again, if you buy into the rhetoric, if you buy into the propaganda, that all of these things are broken within law enforcement. And conversely, I think people are finding out that the vast majority of the law enforcement agencies are already doing it right. The vast majority of these agencies have those model policies. They have the ideal training. They have the de-escalation as one example of many. The duty to intercede. All of these things that are in place have been in place for a very long time. And I think as we continue to, and that's one of the things I would implore our viewers as well, reach out to your locals. I've made a personal invite to all of our local representatives, senators, congressmen, anybody who impacted my region. I invited them, come spend some time with us. Let's talk about what we're doing. Let's talk about reality, because I want them to be able to make educated decisions moving forward. I don't want them to base their decisions on the rhetoric or the propaganda either. Come and see what's really going on, and we'll talk about what changes are needed to be made, because there are some changes that should be made. My opinion, the arbitration system is one example, but we need to embrace the truth, and we need to stand united in this effort for police reform to enhance the community trust.
Absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head, and especially when you challenge our listeners, don't wait for them. Reach out yourself.
Do it.
We're leaders. And
it's an investment.
Absolutely. And I don't. You said it perfectly.
As a community member, and you guys are both talking about kind of seeking the truth and not listening to the propaganda, are there other tools out there for community members other than just reaching out to like directly to you? Do you know, either of you, are there tools for the community?
You kind of have to do the dig deep, unfortunately, and that's one of the things that I think that the national sheriffs and even the state associations could do a better job of is, what is the truth? These are the stats. Based on the FBI uniform crime reports, or based on there's been, and I won't remember off the top of my head, but there's been a couple of different universities that did the deep dive into all the use of force incidents across the nation, and to that point, there's roughly just under 1 million law enforcement officers across our nation who are making millions and millions and millions of contacts every single day in the face of the unknown and hostility and adversity, and quite honestly dealing with the things that most of our society also doesn't want to acknowledge even exists in their own neighborhoods. They're evil's alive and well, folks, and we know that in this profession, but a lot of our communities that we serve don't fully understand that, don't fully embrace that there are people who would victimize them just to victimize them in the name of greed or whatever else. And so a part of that balance is using the data from those millions and millions of contacts. When you evaluate a tiny, tiny fraction of those contacts, even though it's in all of those difficult circumstances, result in use of force. And a tiny, tiny fraction of them result in deadly force situations. And a tiny, tiny fraction of those are questionable in any ways. And we've kind of lost sight of the fact in this country that sometimes, actually, the vast majority of the time, if there's a police shooting, the suspect created that situation.
Absolutely.
You know, I've said in our own community forums, when you run from the police, when you fight with the police, when you try to disarm the police, or when you shoot at the police, bad things will happen every single time.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you're told you're under arrest, it's not a discussion anymore. There's, that's the law. You're under arrest, and you now have an obligation to comply and go to jail. Somewhere along the line, that message has also been lost. And so I think it really does need to be a marketing campaign. But tragically, I don't think it should necessarily come from just law enforcement. It ought to be our legislators. It ought to be our community leaders, because, of course, law enforcement is going to be seen as having a bias in these areas.
Right.
Well, it's true. Our bias is we want everyone to go home safely. We want the suspects to be safe. We want our communities to be safe. We want our officers and deputies to be safe. But that can't happen as long as people think they have the right, again, to fight with the deputies, to shoot at the police. And ultimately, when those things happen, again, I can't reiterate it enough, bad things will happen every single time. And that's not what we want. It's not what our communities want. But unfortunately, we have a group of, or a nation of a younger generation who thinks that I don't have to go to court. I don't have to go to jail. I don't agree with you. Well, you don't have to agree with the officer. You just have to comply. And I think it's a very slippery slope that we're going down by not having more legislative or community leaders step up and just say, comply.
And you'll have your day in court to disagree.
That's right.
And you'll have your day in court to do it. And out on the street at 2:00 in the morning, trying to take some officer's head off, you're right. It's going to be a bad day and a bad ending. And I guess that I would say what Sheriff Stuart said is that do your research and deep dive yourself. Those numbers are out there. You know, the amount of shootings across this country, everything is tracked, everything is followed. You know, there's a process and a procedure where there's a shooting. You know, we never ever investigated our own. We always brought in an outside entity if there was an incident, and that just gives it that transparency. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things too, is just be transparent and be wide open and share everything that goes on. Because when you try to go into that secret squirrel stuff you don't need to know, they do need to know. We work for the public. The public does need to know what we're doing. And I used to always say that. We're an open book. You come in and ask us anything.
That's right.
We'll show you how we do things. We show you what we do. And I think that, again, that transparency is one of those tools too, so that, what's happening across this country right now is really a travesty, because it is not who law enforcement is.
That's right.
There's and I will use the word, there's a bad rap going on. I mean, right now there's a force out there trying to completely destroy the institution of law enforcement's reputation, and it needs to stop, because we are the foundation of safety in this country, and if it's gone, anarchy prevails. And right now you have a lot of places where officers are really second guessing whether they want to do their job anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's a scary place to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're kind of coming to the end of the show, but we kind of want to open it up to you. Any final message, Sheriff Stuart, you have for nation's law enforcement, the communities, anything?
You just gave a sheriff an open microphone and a platform.
So, yeah,
here we go.
If you guys want to take off, I'll try to wrap this up in the next 90 minutes or so. No, I think, well, several things. First, make that investment. Make that, we talked about how do we counter the message. And so if you're not running a Citizens Academy, think about starting a Citizens Academy. If you haven't reached out to your local lawmakers, your legislators, then do that. Make that investment. Try to have that educational side of things. And if you're not doing an annual open house, regardless of the size of your agency, my attitude is it's not my office, it's the people's office. And so aside from COVID, this has been a bizarre year for everyone, but we try to open the doors every September and have an open house and invite people all around to come in and see your sheriff's office. And it's been wildly successful, and we'll continue to do that once we get over this COVID hump again. But I think that's a big part of it. And then internally within your organizations, we talked a little bit about COVID, but between the unrest, between the rhetoric and the propaganda, 2020 has been a very difficult year. We know law enforcement is always a difficult road. It's always a heavy burden to carry for those individuals who've been chosen. I was going to say who chose the path, but I believe they were called. And so as they serve the communities, it's always difficult. But this year, with everything on top of that, your troops are very tired. Everybody is feeling exhausted. And so for the law enforcement leaders out there, for our sheriffs and administrators, command staff, take the time, lift up your team, make sure they know you have their back, support them, Get them the equipment they need if you can. Get them the training that they're asking for. Do what you can do to not just say you support them, but back it up with your actions. They'll always remember your actions over your words. And so I really encourage you to continue to support your teams, to strengthen them, to talk about how you unify on a region, work with your neighboring law enforcement agencies, and again, whether you are more active in your state associations, and certainly encourage you to join your membership with the National Sheriff's Association as well. At the end of the day, we're all in this together. We need to commit to stand shoulder to shoulder to write success stories.
Amen. Amen. Well, my friend, it has been an absolute privilege to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for coming to join us.
My privilege.
Just sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. I know our listeners appreciated it. We sure appreciated it.
Absolutely.
And, I just can't thank you enough. And Semper Fi, brother.
Semper Fi. Thank you.
All right. You've been listening to Jail Talk. We'll see you next time.